So you've got an interview coming up and you just are trying to get all of your thoughts together to get prepared for talking about what you want to do and how you want to do it and how this is a fit. So if you're preparing for an interview, today I want to talk to you about how I prepare for an interview, and hopefully you can take some tidbits away from it. My name is JMEarley. I help individuals and teams achieve organizational and personal success. And this is Leadership Matters. Okay, so I just wanted to come by, stop on real quick to talk to you about how I prepare for interviews. I know it's a big deal, it's a big step, especially for those of you who are transitioning to training, even for those of you who are in training, who've been looking for a position and you've been maybe out of practice for a little while. Sometimes that happens to me, and these are the things that I do to kind of prepare myself for an interview, because it's nerve-wracking. You never really know what some of the questions that people will ask or the information that they're seeking, and you want to have your responses as well thought out as possible. So this is what I do. Guys, bear with me. The weather is fluctuating. It hasn't made up its mind whether it wants to be hot, cold, dry, rainy, or snowy where I am. And unfortunately, when the weather is bipolar, so too is my health. So if you hear that I'm stuffed up or any of those things, you can thank the weather for that one. Okay, so let me just talk to you about, you've looked at we've already gone through the part where you've looked at what's out there, you've submitted your resume, your interest, your application materials, you've gotten a call back, you've had, your preliminary interview where the recruiter calls, they tell you a little bit about the position and the organization and what they're looking for and all of that. And you've been invited back now to interview with the organization. So this is where we're going to start today in this video. We'll talk about what I look for when I'm looking for opportunities in another video, but today we're going to focus on how I actually prepare for the interview. So once I get through that initial interview generally with a recruiter, and they extend an invitation to come back and talk to people in training and development, I have found throughout my career that those are rarely one-off interviews. In recent years in particular, they have always been panels. When I first started my career, they would be one-on-one interviews. Let's say I would start with, the recruiter, then I would start with then it would go to the hiring manager, and then it would go to the department director, and then it would be culminate into a panel interview with the team, right? So I was accustomed to, I've talked about this before in other videos, having to actually present a training program as my culminating activity in an interview process. If I get distracted, for those of you who've been watching me any time period, you know about Bailey, my dog, who, of course, is basically at my feet chewing her bone right now. So just follow me as I flow. So anyway, in recent years, I found that there have been, the interview process really involves multiple people at every level beyond the recruiter, which is fine. So if this is your first foray into interviewing for training and development position, do not be surprised if the recruiter tells you you'll be interviewing with 2 to 3 other people. So the very first thing I do once I get the invitation is I look up those individuals I'm interviewing with, who they are, what their background is, what they do for the company. This gives me an opportunity to, try to discern before the interview what they might be looking for in a candidate, because each person is going to come from a different perspective in the organization. Therefore, their desires for a candidate are going to be different, and what their expectations of a candidate are different as it relates to the role that they play in the organization and how they see that candidate fulfilling that position within the larger scheme of the organization. So the first thing I do is I look folks up. And I've had a lot of success mentioning in small talk in the interview or linking it to my responses some of the things that the individual has excelled at, some of their achievements, some of their former organizations even. I've interviewed with people that had very interesting journeys to their role, and we've talked about that. And so people are always impressed that you do the extra work, not just on the organization, but on the people. The second thing I do is a lot organizations have moved to, and I think this probably has been, at least in our industry, has been a thing for a while, where they want to know not exactly what you did. They want to know what you did and how you did it, but more than anything else, they want to know what effect what you did had on the organization, on their objectives, on their goals, on their culture, on the organization as a whole, all of those things. Not that you just met deadlines, you delivered a program, but what that delivered program ultimately did for the department, division, and or organization. So I have been doing this a long time. For those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Please hit the like and subscribe button. I try to just give as much information as I can from my perspective, from my vantage point. And then I ask everyone else who's watching, who has some experience or who's new to it, because we can always benefit from, different perspectives, to chime in the comments so that other people, so we can have a real community and we can learn from one another. But I've been doing this a long time, over 20 years. I can't remember every single program I've developed for every organization in every industry for 20 years. Like most of us, my most recent projects are really what kind of pops in my mind. Not to mention the fact that I was an elected official for 15 and a half years. I was a legislator, a council person in my community. I was council president. I've got various things that I can pull from as it relates to leadership, as it relates to project management, as it relates to budget reconciliation and budget management, and training individuals, not just in corporate America, but also in public sector, and just cross-training individuals to be able to take on leadership roles and responsibilities. So I say all that to not to toot my horn, but to say that in stressful situations, as interviewing can sometimes, even for me, be stressful, you don't always recollect readily or cohesively the things that you have done to be able to respond to questions because of the nerves that are involved. I was also a former adjunct professor teaching interpersonal communication and public speaking, so I know how physiological blocks impede us from being as clear and concise as we like to be under those situations. So what I do in preparation is I get a copy of my resume. I always keep a working copy of my resume up to date, regardless to my situation. It's been a long time since I've been on a project or at a job that I was anxious to get out of. I generally will not accept assignments or projects or look for jobs that I don't feel are going to be a fit, just because I've been doing this for so long. I'm fortunate enough to now know what I bring to the table and what I expect in return from an organization, what I need to be productive, efficient, and effective on a job. So I don't keep that working resume because I'm anxious to leave. I keep it because as I build my skill set and I have new opportunities and I learn, new perhaps software and systems and other things, I don't want to forget. So I add those things to my resume as I go along. I also have done videos. You can go ahead and search through my channel. But I've also done videos about the importance of keeping electronic portfolios. So I think that the electronic portfolio is great because you can always point someone to it. But when you're in the midst of interviewing, it's not like you're on your LinkedIn page, like, hold on one second, let me just scroll through and, oh yeah, let me talk about this. So I look at my resume, I look at my LinkedIn profile, and I generally make a cheat sheet. I use a paper about this size. I write down who I'm interviewing with, on what date. I write down any interesting things to note about those individuals and their positions. And then I go through and I look at my resume and I really sit down and take the time to think about my previous positions and projects and projects that I'm particularly proud of, or impacts that I made, or results. Like I worked on a project in recent years where this division of the organization had never done formal training. They had always done side by side, sit with me, shadow me type things within their own division. They never had someone with a background in training and development who understood the importance of adult learning and development and applying those principles to developing curriculum, actually develop curriculum and do an instructor-led training. That is something that I want to highlight because of the work that I did with that client. Not only did it open them up to more to being more willing to work with formal training, but it also went from what they originally wanted, which is 3 PowerPoints, 3 1-hour PowerPoints, to a entire curriculum. When I left the project, that curriculum was about 4 courses, so that was a feat. Both for the organization and for myself. So I always want to highlight that. But I look at my resume, I go back, sit down, I think about my career. Think about the highlights. If I had to do like a highlight reel, what would I include in that highlight reel? Because really that's what an interview is. An interview is your highlight reel. So they want to know, what you did, how you did it. And remember, I told you most importantly, how you accomplished it, right? And what the results of the accomplishments were. That's your levels of evaluation. And I've talked about that before too. I know that as an industry, we've kind of gotten away from the return on investment, but companies very much want to know that when they're investing money in training and development, that it's worthwhile. And they only know that if they can tie it back to an employee's performance and tie that performance back to an increase in productivity, sales, things of that nature.